recording is on.
Well, hello everybody. Today we are having a conversation with George, and I would like if George could introduce himself first, and then we'll kick in with a few questions on the topics that we were planning. Okay, thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm George. Thank you for welcoming me to your group. I hate talking about myself. I'm just gonna keep it short. I'm a writer, scientist, and human, most of all. And it's a pleasure to meet the late Lord Hugh's circle of friends. I had some really amazingly dense interactions with him in the past, and it just feels like such an honor actually to almost kind of be with him today. I said I was going to be short, so that's it.
That's fine. That's fine. We were listening to. Well, I was listening to your last talks with Hugh, and I listened to the one that you had with Michael Dowd recently.
Mm.
And I remember that one of the topics that you introduced, that you talked about with Hugh and with Michael Dowd, is um, the human place in this world. The human. You more or less said that humans didn't have a real ecological purpose, and at the moment we are talking about the consciousness and the role and who are we, what are we there for, what is our. I will read later on a little phrase that our friend Gary has sent to, but I would like maybe to start the conversation on this. And if anybody else has something to add before we leave the floor to George.
Well, shall I start? I mean, if we are asking, it's a fair question, I guess, to ask. Now that more and more of us can see that you know Earth is coming to a head. Civilization is coming to a head. It's going to be something else. Maybe it's not going to completely end, but the whole planet is going through what is going to be a very, very rough time for every one of the 8 million species on the planet. So that's not up for dispute. I guess it is a fair question to ask, what is then our purpose? What is consciousness? I mean, is it? My short answer is purpose is a construct. It doesn't exist. We don't have a purpose. I'm really sorry. You're gonna have to die disappointed. There is no purpose. Um, what I always say is, as humans, our purpose, if you want to put it that way, is to simply exist. And that should be enough. That should be enough. And the problem is that it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for us. We wanted more. We wanted to prove that we are the best species on Earth. We wanted to, tear down the whole tapestry of these 8 million species and just build it up again, make it, of all of human threads. Whether it's, the materials that humans make, plastic and radioactivity and metal and all these things that you see in the cities. We wanted to just create it all from scratch. So it's really a narcissistic question to ask, what is our purpose? There is no purpose, but that's okay because we are part of, even today as things are collapsing, we are still part of this tapestry, this amazing tapestry. And I remember in one of my essays where I came to the conclusion that our purpose is to be a mirror, to simply reflect all the beauty that is around us. And just by being part of this beauty is an honor, should be an honor for us, rather than a jumping point to feel, oh, I'm inadequate. I want to be more. I don't want to be like the squirrels or the trees because I've got this massive brain. I don't. So the minute we started looking down on all the other 8 million species, that's when things went wrong. When we regarded ourselves not as a mirror, but as a TV screen, as another world that you go into. And it's a human only world, it's a monoculture, and nothing else matters. So this is where we actually completely, and I'm going to leave it at that because I'm probably inspiring lots of thoughts. This is where it all went wrong because we're not part of an ecosystem anymore. The mirror is broken.
Yeah, great. I agree totally that our purpose could be just existing, and I would ask you, you know, sitting here now, 2022, with some kind of collapse in the near future, would you agree, or in any way, that our purpose now, as let's say enlightened or collapse aware humans, that our purpose now could be to find a way for us to go back to being an animal or an ecological animal, and accept it and manage it also. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think
Mm.
this would be our best bet to go back to the things we know. Uh, you know, it's funny because I have this conversation with my mother sometimes, and she really gets it. She's from another generation where, I grew up in Greece, and Greece in the last 50 years has gone from here to here. It's called the Greek miracle. There were like 5 decades of massive economic growth and massive ecological collapse at the same time with tourism and everything. So my mother has actually seen through her life go from no electricity, no nothing, making their own food at home, to this artificial life. So she actually knows it even better than me, although she's not in the circuit of climate activists. And what she always says is it's really simple. It's going back to being more like an animal, not consuming so much, not destroying so much, living in balance with Earth. But I I would love to say that this is now our purpose of the collapse aware people, but the collapse aware people will never be enough to shift this society that is hostage to capitalism in a way that we only exist to be unhappy. This is what our economic system wants. It wants us to be unhappy so that we keep buying stuff. And as long as we are unhappy, we are asleep and we don't know what's happening to us. We are running, doing these jobs to get this money, to spend this money, and still we need more stuff. So we need to work harder. So we go through this cycle, this, what do you call it, a hamster wheel, and it's asleep. It's, we're moving, but we're actually completely asleep, and you can see that it's getting worse and worse and worse. You would have thought that the worse the climate gets, now we have this heat wave in Spain, which is quite unusual for June, but the more it happens, you see how the more we fall asleep. So it's really, to me, I hate to be a pessimist, but it's the worst case scenario. I used to think 5 years ago that when the climate gets really, really bad, and when the wars begin, when the food crisis begins, when the inflation begins, people are going to start waking up. Now, people are going to fall into even more sleep because this will be a survival mechanism. And I hope I'm wrong.
You're not wrong. You're completely right. I think people are going more and more into their denialism, the more obvious, the more I find myself being a long-term doomer, going, aha, this is true, this is all happening. Look at the collapse of this and the failure of that and the war of so and so. Yeah, the people are just less inclined to get with it. And yeah, where does that leave us is a very good question. Where does it leave the poor doomers? What are we going to
Yeah,
do?
I would say that we are running to stand still. To quote U2, one of the U2 songs.
Love that song.
Yeah,
Just
I like to draw a parallel to what you said about Greece, because that sounds very much like Norway, where I grew up, right? So, like 50 years ago, maybe 100 years ago, we were this, mountainous, skiing, farming country, like pretty poor, one of the poorest in Europe. And then over just the time I've been alive, since we found oil and stuff, we've gone filthy rich and disgustingly oil soaked. And when I see my classmates, from high school and stuff, they have picked up no ethics. So it's just okay. All this wealth is around, so I'm just gonna build a giant house, a giant mansion, and I'm gonna have two or three, cottages and a house in Spain and whatever, or Greece. And it's like, yeah, we came out of the 1980s, 90s high school with absolutely no ethics. Only a tiny few people had any sort of ecological sense of right and wrong, and the others are like, yeah, I have this money, so I can spend it, right?
Yeah, it's the same story in Ireland. Ireland has a long story of poverty and colonialism by the UK and all sorts of deprivation, and then suddenly in the 80s the money from the EC came, and also all sorts of other financial companies from America started to establish themselves here, and suddenly something happened called the Celtic Tiger, which completely changed people totally from, like you said, Torstein, little farmers who suddenly started buying apartments in Spain, and the complete craziness. Actually, it did collapse more or less in 2008, but the habit was taken, and the cultural heritage and the respect for the sacred was gone, or the sacred, I'm talking about nature, was gone, and the respect for our seas, our oceans. We gave away our fishing rights in exchange of subsidies for intensive farming. It is just totally what simple, how do you call it? Fishing with little boats disappeared. Everything is started to. But anyway, to come back to what you were saying about the role of humans, and I'm just going to just very quickly read something that Gary sent us. And he said, regarding George's comment to the effect that humans have no biological purpose here, perhaps our meaning is extra biological. It needs a physical basis, but can encompass more. And he writes a comment that somebody wrote on our sub, saying, self-reference, consciousness is the most wondrous, inexplicable miracle of the known universe. And this is what we do. The awareness of awareness of awareness. People look at me strangely, but if you go to that place, that's it. That is beyond the mind, the language, and that is our human godness, our potential, our ultimate purpose and reason for being. There's a lot in there, but Gary and ourselves have had this conversation for the last 2 weeks, really a lot about this, and what you talk about being a mirror. He is more insisting on the fact that we are maybe the only creature that has awareness.
I wouldn't. I think it's a continuum. I wouldn't say we are the only creature, and also because there are different versions of awareness and there are different languages of awareness. We tend to think, I think, sometimes of awareness in human terms, and I have a feeling that there's probably a creature out there that speaks a completely different language or has a different thought pattern that we don't even understand. And we know the sentience of so many animals now, the octopus, the dolphin, all these animals. So I think it's more of a continuum rather than us being apart from all other 8 million species. Although, at face value, when you look at human civilization from space and what it has done to Earth, you see all these cities lighting up, kind of almost like infecting a petri dish. You realize, wow, just one of these 8 million species has done all this. So, I mean, I don't disagree with what you read. I actually thought it's very hopeful. You would think that with this level of self awareness, we would be able to transcend the mess that we have brought ourselves into.
Yeah. But isn't that all we can do as doomers too? Is this transcendence actually that we need to get to this stage now because we've lost. We know we've lost. We know we've destroyed everything. But I don't think we should fall into species guilt because that is the road of the cynical. It's the road of the nihilistic. And I see a lot of that online with some doomers, we are a parasite, we need to disappear, we are this, we are that. I don't think that is either a good avenue to follow.
I've written blogs with that in mind, and it's something. It's I think it's a rite of passage that you have to go through in your thought process as a doomer. You go through the depression, you go through the self hatred. As a biologist myself, thinking of all the species that I personally feel responsible that I've made extinct as a human being on this earth, I can't help but think, well, I'm not going to shed more than a couple of tears if we go extinct. It's just our turn, and you get it's karma. But coming back to the concept of awareness, self-awareness, and intelligence. If we put ethics aside, guilt aside, this is right, this is wrong, because it isn't. There is value in looking at things in a very cold scientific way, because in nature, actually, there is no ethics. This big fish eats the small fish, and it's all a balance. The the question, I guess, that I have is, could things have ever turned out differently? And I don't think they could have, because once you have a species that becomes super intelligent, this is what happens. You have the birth of civilization, you have a population explosion, because there is no predator for this species. And you have this, I guess, selfishness, which again is not selfishness, because this is what happens when a predator is super intelligent and is able to overcome all other predators. So I don't think that this could have happened any other way. And we need to, I think, accept that. And we need to accept that intelligence itself, which we do have and is a beautiful thing, is generally not good for planets.
Yeah.
You often said that it's this maladaptation of the brain, this alien cortex. It's the problem of all our evils. That we're clever, but we're not wise. We've, as we've said before, as Gary you were all alluding to, we've abstracted our environment. We've divorced ourselves from that natural world. Probably because at one point there were big cats that were eating us, but we enclosed ourselves, didn't we? We divorced ourselves, and that has led us down this unstoppable route that was impossible to probably come back from. But I don't know, I still kind of feel like there was points where we could have rolled back slightly. I don't know, I feel like maybe the last generation that has the most to blame is probably the boomers, the baby boomers. But how could they stop themselves? I don't know, it's difficult. it's like we talked about that meeting they had in the 70s. Was it limits to growth? And Hugh often said that he thought that was the point when the elites they knew that was the point. Well, they knew there was, if it didn't stop there, then, well, it was already too late, basically. So, I don't know what you think about that, but
I love that.
maybe the solution to what Sophie talks about guilt and feeling guilt about our species is to kind of separate different concepts in our thoughts, because just like South Africans were not the apartheid system, human beings as an animal is not the industrial society. We were something else for millions of years, and in my thought anyway, we are going to be something else, separate from the industrial system. So what I would suggest is that we can condemn the industrial civilization. Of course, there are lots of kind of good things like art and science and different things that are not necessarily bad in themselves. Poetry, literature, music. But we have to realize that the system that we've built on this planet, which lights up the planet at night, can be seen from space, it's not a good or ecological system. But that doesn't mean that we as the constructors of that system are necessarily all for it or all bad, because it's like, you can be a minority, like the ecological minority in Norway. You can be counterculture, like many people are, and basically our entire history as animals on the planet is different from these past 300 years, and also different from the past agricultural 10,000 years. So I just think we have to sort of separate what aspects are bad and what things are good. And I don't think it's humans per se that are the bad guys. Yeah, not really clear, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, look, the system that we live in is bigger than us. It's bigger than the human. We are all hostage to it. Look at us. We're, video conferencing from laptops that we have to plug into the wall to get electricity. That we're dependent on, the stocks of the energy market. There's no way to get out of that unless we completely, pull the plug from the wall. And no one's going to do that. I'm not going to do that either. I like my digital music too. I listen to Spotify like 8 hours a day. I'm a music maniac. The system has become bigger than the humans, and it is almost a sentient system now. It is this industrial capitalist. It's almost sentient, Even when you now go online to buy something, you get recommendations. There's actual AI that is driving the system, that is, making bets on the stock market that is, it is increasingly bot driven to perpetuate profits and, the exploitation of humans themselves. Because the concept behind capitalism was to create products and sell them. And I sell you some apples and you give me some cows, and we're happy. It works like that. We exchange stuff. But what happened in the end is that we now are the product. We are the ones that are being farmed, propagated, exploited, and paid a salary as a compensation to think that we are actually winning something out of this situation, but we're actually not. we're surrendering everything to the system, and I guess, going back to awareness and meaning, this is why we're not happy. This is why we're increasingly unhappy, and this is why we're increasingly wondering, what are we? What's our purpose? The minute a human is starting to wonder, what is my purpose? I don't know. It's a little bit of if you were really happy, you wouldn't even be asking that question.
Yeah, that's true. Jason, would you like to talk about Hugh's alien cortex? Because I know he has introduced that to George. Maybe George doesn't remember, or maybe he does, but it was more. Would you have a little word on this, Jason? We can't.
I can give it a little go, but I mean, I don't know. Are you ever familiar with some of the videos that you produced and talked about this maladaptation to the brain through probably early Neanderthals breeding with other early humans, and then that led to this this new the most recent part of our brain.
Your sound is very bad. Maybe there's something you can do with your microphone. Your sound.
Sorry, is that a bit better? Sorry, apologies. I'm on the phone. Yeah, I think he came up with this concept. I mean, it's basically I think it's the neofrontal cortex, isn't it? But Hugh had this. He labelled it the alien cortex because it's alien from the other base layers of the brain. He often used that psychological. It's a very old, the layered brain theory. You probably know, George, since you're a biologist, through you have the fish, the mammalian brain, the lizard brain, all of these very ancient layers of our brain, and this most recent part of our brain has come about, and it's led to everything we see before us, everything we've created. So in many ways, it's incredible, that it allowed us to invent tools. That was the first thing, and then of course pattern recognition, and to develop hunting methods, and just to completely manipulate our environment. And it was brilliant in many ways, but then of course it led initially to farming, and then the ultimate divorce. And it's the root cause of all our problems. When you look at it through that lens, it kind of turns your world upside down. It was a very amazing insight he had, actually. It was quite genius. But I'm not sure if you were familiar with that.
I'm familiar with his coining of the term. For me, I think of it a bit more simply as processing power. So that if we think of the human brain as a computer, the minute you have this brain exploding, which basically happened over not a very long geological time, it was a mutation, and it was evolutionarily selected, because intelligence will always be selected very quickly by evolution. So it was unavoidable, and it's almost like, to me, kind of like nature discovering quantum computing. This was the sort of nature of the leap from the, I don't know, early ape brain to the human brain. Suddenly you have, you're from artists, you have humans just going nuts, just, just making sculptures, just like making music instruments. I mean, civilization came about, and we just did all these things because this brain, which by the way is the same, almost the same exact brain we have now as thousands of years ago. We are still exploring it. We are still actually developing it because it is, in a way, more than what we needed. So I guess this is a question Carl Sagan often asks, will this happen in other planets? Would intelligence rise? What are the ingredients that would result in a species like the humans arising? If the dinosaurs hadn't been hit by an asteroid, would we then be here? We don't know, but what we do know is that it did happen. It did happen, and it happened on a planet, and it happened within an ecosystem. So it's almost like a virus. Kind of something went wrong, and intelligence arose, and this became an aberration within the system. And you can call it an aberration or a virus, or you can just say it was unavoidable, because the minute intelligence arises, the minute you have the alien cortex, then indeed you are super intelligent, but you're not wise, because evolution selects for survival skills. And what are the survival skills of humans? I mean, clear out the forest, build the 3 houses. These are survival skills. And they were selected by evolution on this planet. This is how I justify it, and this is how I manage to sleep at night guiltless, thinking that, hey ho, it happened. Because the question is, now that some of us know this, can we do something about it? Can we minimize the impacts so that as much of this biological tapestry survives into the next phase of the planet, which is coming, which is going to be a very different planet. But it will be there.
So
it's the idea that we can do something about something the same fucked up twattery that we've been suffering from all along. Is that alien cortex, ego, over intelligent? I can't quite get my head around the question of whether, now that I am belonging to the group of the people who know the state of the world or whatever it is, do I now have to do something about that, either as an individual or as a part of a group? Or I'm completely at a loss of how to process this feeling of a knowing that I can't share with anybody apart from a small group of apparent lunatics on the internet. And again, if you sort of take this view of there's no purpose, and I can sort of go into that quasi-religious or spiritual thought process of, maybe the purpose of humankind is that God gave you the right and the ability to be a massive asshole, and how do you not do that, right? Can you, having been given that right? So I could take a religious view and say, so it is my job, and you could have any religion really and interpret it that way. How do I take the ability to be an asshole and not be an asshole? And maybe that's my mission in life. And you could see that as a sort of given thing, or you could see it from a sort of non-religious point of view as just, that's just how things evolve, blah, blah, blah. But the same idea, I'm an asshole, can I not be an asshole? I don't know if that's a good way of framing it, but
no, I think that's a great word, asshole. I can say it too. Well, if I can speak as a friend, I know we don't know each other very well, but I'm really feeling your energy because I've been there as well. I'm getting a sense that you're actually not a doomer yet. You're still hoping. You're still thinking that there is something that you can do. And you are putting a lot of pressure on yourself personally. I was there, and it's not good because you're not being nice to yourself. My The way I got out of it is I gave up. I gave up. I became a real doomer, and all I can say is I feel personally lucky that I am enlightened and I can share this conversation here with you guys. But I think putting so much pressure on yourself that it's now upon you to kind of awaken everyone else. I mean, yes, we can awaken other people, and we gathered here today. Obviously because we care. Yeah, we still care, however much we feel it might be a lost battle. But I personally don't like to put myself under so much pressure anymore because it can actually really get you down.
Yeah, I don't think I'm sort of feeling necessarily that under that sort of pressure. Yeah, I think I'm more transitioning away from that in some way. But I guess I'm still perplexed about what the consequences are of just the awareness of that. And I'm not disagreeing. Maybe I haven't quite. Yeah, maybe I can't quite wear the doomer hat, or maybe there is a lingering sense of can something be done, or even as an individual. So yeah, it's your personal response to the thing. Oh yeah, why not then? Oh, I'm going to go on a cruise around the world now. Because there's nothing can be done. It's very hard. Yeah, it's difficult to know how you process being
Yeah,
in that
because
state of awareness.
it's really very deep in your existence once you have realized that the whole system, especially lots of us here that I think that because I also grew up in the 80s, and that was indeed, at least in my lifetime, the decade where you know the glass and steel corporate machine was like idolized, in the movies and like everything, get the big job, get the big car, get the big, that was to me, that was the, that decade and the couple of decades before that, the baby boomers,
But now all of that's coming is, I suppose, my view on this is like, from a positive point of view, a positive collapse point of view would be that all of that is now teetering. I mean, it really is teetering on the brink. This was something actually I wanted to bring up with you because I know you've been very vocal in regards to the war in Ukraine, and obviously that war is always terrible, and I think I can speak for everyone in our group that we'd never want to um, be positive about the actions of Putin. But I think you would probably agree with me on this, that the way to look at all of these things is that the world is running out of resources and things are accelerating now. So he would probably take an accelerationist point of view on this to say that that war is pushing the global financial system, but what we've known, the Western Anglo-spheric global capitalist system, it's going to come crashing down. It already is now. We are actually at the tip of the bubble, and now we're going to see a completely global polar, like tripolar world developing. Russia has cut itself off from the Western financial system, and they had a huge amount of resources. So the West, we don't produce anything anymore. We just financialize our way into oblivion. We don't produce products. So from that point of view, it's looking pretty good. Like the economy is going to collapse. I mean, people are going to start waking up. I mean, I don't know what you think about that. It's a bit of a different way to look at it, but I would definitely look at that war as an economic war. I think Putin has seen the writing on the wall for a long time. They have known that, China, Russia, they've been stacking gold. They know that it's all a fraud. It's a big Ponzi, this Western economic system. And I think, if anything, that's the one thing that might make people realize we're going to go back to more localism. Things are going to be hard. I mean, fuel prices here in UK, they're getting insane now. It's definitely going to go beyond £3 per litre before the end of the year. I mean, small businesses are collapsing. It's, food prices. We're getting. I mean, India. We've had these heat waves, haven't we? We're definitely going to see mass die-offs soon. I mean, that's almost approaching wet bulb events. So I don't think it's terrible, but it's positive in the terms of, if you want to accelerate the collapse so that somebody survives, so that something survives. In that respect, it's good. I don't know. What's your thoughts?
If I can respond to Bob, is that okay? Because I think that I sense your question is sort of now that I'm a doomer, what next? What now? What do I have to do now? And I think, to start with a negative, what you don't have to do now is to go out like a missionary to the entire world and give the word of Jesus to everybody. That is something you don't have to do. So if that was something you were worried about,
no, don't worry, I wasn't worried about that.
no, but you don't, because it kind of doesn't matter if people know or don't know, because it's all gonna crash anyway. So
just forgive me for interjecting. I'm actually more scared of more people knowing, because I think that would launch an insane panic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Over to you.
So the only thing there is to informing people is kind of helping people, let's say on a person-to-person level, and to help people realize what is ahead. But that doesn't have to be public. It doesn't have to be large scale. It can just be to help your friends or some relatives or something, I think. And other than that, I think it's more like an inner, personal, spiritual thing, mostly. Trying to reconnect with nature and Mother Nature and stuff. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So that's very, very succinct to the point.
So what would be your position, George, on what Tom was saying about the war in Ukraine?
So I love that he brought about the economy, because that is number one. The economy is about everything. And to me, as a biologist, I think of economy in biological terms. So economy is not just about the human economy. It's about the wealth and the energy and the food chain across the planet. So the real economy of the planet, which is not the human economy, the Earth economy, is collapsing now. And everything is connected. Absolutely everything that you mentioned is connected. The war, to me, the pandemic, everything is a result of overshoot of population, of nature exploitation, habitat destruction. Everything, the Arctic, the ozone, the soil, everything is being degraded, and it is a very, very all-encompassing and complete deterioration across the globe, which to us, to our species, we only see the very, very last manifestation, which is the numbers and the economy and the price of petrol. But behind that, what lies is a very, very complex series of processes that have been happening for hundreds of years since the Industrial Revolution really accelerated. And because it is an acceleration, we are now the lucky or unlucky people that are really at that cusp where the curve of the exponential function is so steep that the difference between yesterday and today is as big as it was between today and 50 years ago. We are really at that cusp now. And to me, the number one thing that's on my mind is really the blue ocean event, because we have no idea what's going to happen, and it could be something absolutely massive that could actually be a point where we could say, oh, there was actually an actual collapse because the disturbance of the circulation of ocean currents like that by the breaking of the summer ice. To me, there is possibilities there that we might see something that is not like increasing heat waves. It might just be actually the year where something happens. And if it's not that year, it's going to be another year. Um, so yeah, the to me the inflation is also a biological term. Inflation is when something, a resource, a food, sunlight, oxygen in the ocean, whatever the chemical entity that you're referring to, is becoming dearer and uh, um, less abundant. So it becomes pricey. And this is why we're now seeing this inflation, which, I mean, now they're saying, oh, it's not actually, it's going to stay for a few years. I mean, there you go. Society is going to possibly collapse next because people are already wondering, why should I even work? I can't pay my bills. I'm doing McDonald's in the evening and cleaning houses in the morning. And I still can't pay my rent. What's the point? Next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go and smash a bank. So societal collapse, the Mad Max scenario, is what I'm afraid of.
I wouldn't be so dismissive of mutual aid in terms of in times of horrors. There has been examples, and we've talked about that with Hugh a lot. I'm trying to remember the name of that writer who wrote about the Katrina event in New Orleans and how she described actually the enormous percentage of people who supported each other instead of what we imagine, looting and violence. So I think that's, we have to be. I'm not an optimistic or a pessimistic person. I'm just trying to just take a realistic view on human nature. And I think the Hollywood kind of post-doom or post-collapse scenarios are part of a fear-mongering thing to increase our unsettled kind of mind at the moment, and also it's not reality. Rebecca Solnit, that's right, that's the name of the writer, Rebecca Solnit, and I think she is quite right on this. Yeah.
I
I
like
like
that. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about kindness, and humans are both. They're both evil and kind. We have both of those things. We should never dismiss both, and it could be a wake up call for a significant enough segment of the population, especially those that lose absolutely everything, to realize that now that they don't have phones, they're not hooked to social media, they're valuing the real meaning of relationships and things, and like we all did during the pandemic. We all had a bit of a wake-up call, didn't we? um, that maybe that will be big enough for us to at least help each other a bit and help nature a bit. But it really begins from within us first. I use the word kindness. It's a new word for me. It's a new word for a doomer and a guy like me who always looks at the glass half empty. But I really, it's my new favorite word, because we think sometimes of kindness as something altruistic, and when you unconditionally give something away to a homeless person or to someone else. But to me, kindness is actually first and foremost being kind to yourself. That's where it all begins. And the minute that you become kind to yourself, then you realize, do I need to spend my money to get a new house? Do I need to work on that stupid job so I can take that house, so I can have even more responsibilities and be even more unhappy? It's I guess that's the question of the self-awareness, isn't it? Are we self-aware enough to be able to wake up? It's the big question.
Well, you mentioned overshoot a few minutes ago, and we've had this conversation quite a bit too between ourselves about antinatalism and having kids or not in time of collapse, because we have we came to a kind of a mitigated view on this. We had a deep conversation with you about this because there was a few young people in the group who were asking themselves seriously, were they going to conceive, have a child now? And I was wondering, would you share your thoughts on this, George, please?
I just look at the facts. The fact, what I mentioned before, that we don't really have a predator. We're the only species on the planet that doesn't have a predator. What does that mean? It means that we need to become the predator, not to kill our population, but we have the responsibility now to control our population since we have removed all our predators. So we have this huge responsibility. And the only way to do that is to really be aware, conscious of how many children we're having. And but I mean, it doesn't matter now, but it's too late. It's too late anyway. But if this was a way, for example, to drastically reduce emissions, if we were having this conversation maybe 30 years ago, then maybe I would be a lot more passionate about it. Now it's way too late. But for me, what I always say is that the one biggest, by far, thing that you can do to help this planet is to not have a child. Because if you don't have a child, then you don't have to tell that child to consume less, eat less, destroy less, much less than how much you ate, you destroyed. Is that fair to that kid? To tell it that it can't live the life that its parents lived? No. You're asking way too much of that child. And I mean, even bringing it into this world now where we're expecting the blue ocean event is, to me, it's almost like child abuse. I kind of subscribe to that point of view. It's a little bit cruel. So, but like I said, it doesn't matter anymore because it's too late.
Well, you see, what we would say, you would say, is that I don't disagree with you, but we're going from this point. You're looking at things from this point of view that has brought us here in the first place, which is control. And again, we talk about alien cortex, about the intellect, about this ego, this kind of horrible kind of tendency of our recent human evolution to control, to use rationality, to use cleverness against wisdom. So from this point of view, I would say maybe we shouldn't have such a view on having children. Because if we start applying control, we're using the same thing, the same process that has brought to this
But
desperate place.
you see why it doesn't matter, because the control is not really with humans. The control is from the planet. So the planet is now going to reduce our population drastically because the ecosystem and the resource economy within Earth, the oceans and the availability of biological life that we can eat and all of that, that will essentially limit our abilities. And we are we are already in a very precarious situation because we don't realize that our food supply is completely artificial. Everything is agriculture and caged animals. 97% of the biomass of animals is actually animals reared for human consumption. I mean, we are already living in a dystopia. We just don't realize it because of, obviously, we've been living within this culture, but there's no way that Earth could feed 8 billion humans, however many we are now, using permaculture or anything like that. So again, there's no way back, and it almost kind of doesn't matter to have the conversation: do we have or do we not have children? Because at the end of the day, as you say, we don't have the control. We think we have the control. And all this time, all these centuries, we thought we had the control until we ran out of planet, basically. We ran out of planet because now we need something like 3 or 4 Earths to feed these people. But as a scientist, I find almost a macabre kind of reassurance in the physical laws, and we are limited by the the volume and the land mass of Earth. We've used 40% of the land mass for agriculture. The rest, 60%, is mountains that we can't use, cities that are sterile, can't grow food there, and deserts. We've really pushed things to. We farmed and reared as much and farmed as much of this planet as we could have. And going back to the economy, the inflation to me is really the number one indicator that is now showing that any small little disturbance, like a war, the supply of wheat from Ukraine and Russia, is not able to be replaced somewhere else. It's actually even worse, because you've got a war in one place where wheat is grown, and then in the other place where you have wheat grown in India or wherever it is, you've got heat wave. So it's like the worst. It's the perfect storm.
Yeah, the planet setting limits, or Gaia. I'm sure you're familiar with the Gaia theory. I've looked into, or I'm sort of experimenting with thinking about Gaia or the planet as an ally, for this tiny minority of ecological people or collapse-aware people. So without sort of being religious about it or believing in it, like sort of a conscious entity, what do you think about having Gaia as a strategic ally in bringing this unecological civilization over to a post-civilized and more sort of increasingly more balanced world anyway? Thinking
I don't
about it
think
as,
there's any
as a,
other way.
yeah.
I think it's almost like a rhetorical question. Gaia is our mother, and Gaia is something that we rejected as an ally. We separated ourselves from Gaia, and Gaia will continue to be an ally to anything that is able to eke out an existence on this planet, and Gaia will continue. This is the whole point of my latest climate fiction novel. It's very grim, but the kind of sort of positive message out of it is that you get new variants, new mutants in the ocean, new forms of life. You will have that, and you will continue to have that, and maybe until the next species that becomes intelligent and crashes the planet, and then you have a new planet again, and this cycle might repeat a few times until, of course, the sun becomes red giant and engulfs Earth, which is, eventually what will happen. But yeah, I mean, Gaia to me is a goddess. If I can allow the poet inside me to speak, it's anything and everything. And I feel this is where I feel sometimes very angry. The fact that we never got that. We wanted to create our own Gaia, our own biomes within our farms and our greenhouses and I mean, the way that we're heading as a humanity is that however many humans will survive, they will be living on Earth in the way that human expeditions to Mars would live. So it will be so hot outside. We will be in these greenhouses living as aliens within our own planet. And this is the best case scenario, actually. But I could be wrong. Again, going back to my novel, this mutant that arises in the ocean, I think at some point there's different mutants, and at some point to speculate about
Recording is on.
New Gaia could be. So what if there was a microorganism that emitted light in the oceans, in the form of bioluminescence, which already exists, and that light was so intense that it radiated out of Earth and it cooled Earth? I mean, the physics of it probably is completely wrong, but we can dream because, 3.5 billion years ago, this microorganism called a blue-green algae actually gave rise to oxygen. This tiny little thing that you can't even see with your eye is what gave us oxygen, and how you have these trees, these green trees. So the power of life forms and biological life forms can shape the planet. This is what happened to Earth. It gave us an atmosphere of, 20% oxygen, 80% nitrogen, and it gave us human civilization. And now it gave us the Anthropocene, which is the end of that era and the beginning of a kind of clean slate, I guess, sixth mass extinction event.
Yeah, I think this is always the sort of positive way to look at this whole disaster that we've contributed towards. God knows when it started, when we started clearing the land and we started burning fires. I don't know how far you want to go back. Some people say that, pre-industrial, the 1700s, I suppose, or 1600s. But if you look at it at this kind of macro or zoom out view, Earth has always gone through huge cycles, and we're just another product of Earth, we're another creature that lives here. But this idea that we always have that we somehow, we're damaging the planet and that we can save Earth, and it's like, no, Earth's going to be just fine. Earth has gone through these huge hothouse, rapid climatic changes, as Lovelock detailed in many of his work, and the other climate scientists you can see from the ice cores. So, it goes through these stages, and there's huge die-offs, as you say, as the microbiota or whatever in that period when all the photosynthesizers came about. So, yeah, I mean, we can't, it really gets on my nerves when the Greens, try to make it seem like they're holier than thou and that they can, they're somehow better than everyone else because they've got the ideas to save the earth, save the animals, all this rewilding, all these projects. And I think it's just a way of making us feel better about ourselves,
Yeah. Earth will save itself. Trust me.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, there's a little lull. It's a good sign. There's been a lot of deep stuff discussed there. I was thinking about coming back onto what we were talking at the start about the I was going to say our unique self-awareness or not in this universe, even when we talk about other planets, even when we talk about, you know, I'm still it's something that's very much on my mind. I'm not thinking about, oh, what's my purpose? It's not. I'm not into that sort of thing. I'm just thinking how the beauty of the human, the wonderful beauty of the human too. And I kind of think that there would be a form of mourning, grieving the disappearance of humans. And I think the hope of survival of a few is a great thing. I think we have emphasized that in our group, and we've talked about that a lot. And what would anybody want to share something about this?
Well, can people hear me? Hello?
Hello? Yes. Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you, Jason.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm first of all, George, thank you again for being a part of this. I think our group, Lord Hugh's group, is special because we're not just talking about climate, abrupt climate change, economic collapse, social collapse, etc., but really trying to figure out and look at, gain perspective on how we got here. When was the turn? And earlier discussion, when you talked about the breaking of the mirror, you know, at some point, I think Gary, who's a regular member, commented last session that perhaps the alien cortex is our first transhumanist moment. And I think I've been thinking about that, and that may be similar to your observation of, you know, the breaking of the mirror. At some point, we began reflecting or able to tell a story about ourselves, and so you think of that first. You know, we illustrated art on caves about the previous hunt, either as instruction or as reflection, and we improved our methods of hunting and created artifice so that we could hunt better, gain surplus. You would have to imagine, say, the equivalent would be a group of lions getting together and saying, how about that last wildebeest? How about that last meal that we had? That was pretty fantastic, wasn't it? Or even great apes, our closest relatives, getting together and say, how about those shoots of bamboo that we were able to get, or eucalyptus or whatever, in the highlands of Rwanda that they eat. And we don't think that they do that. We can't know. We don't know that elephants or the other smartest higher mammals, whales, we don't know that they don't do this, but we don't think they do so in the same way. And we've had, in those times, it's pretty clear that since, if you take Lord Hugh's historiography, if you take Yuval Noah Harari's somewhat slightly different, but not completely different historiography, where, you know, he ends it very irritatingly with the celebration of transhumanism. Lord Hugh did not. But you look at our dilemma, you know, at what point, here we are. I felt like there should be a Greek chorus. You are Greek, you're in the cradle of civilization. And when you were observing that we have done all these things and we're now communicating via technology over great distance on a planetary scale, I felt like the chorus, the Greek chorus, if it were here, would be saying, and we still don't know why we are here. We still don't know why we are here. To have built all of this and to have watched the Greek civilization arise, ancient Greek civilization arise, and then be destroyed by other empires and by other forces. The Etruscan, the great unknown Etruscan Empire, that gave way, that plus Greek influences gave rise to Rome. We've had these empires decline, and in most cases it was over war for resources or decline of resources. So that is happening again, but now on a planetary scale. And I'm just reflecting that original mirror break, that original, if it is the alien cortex, if that's the metaphor, that's Hugh's metaphor, we were in small groups at that time. Our brain is geared to deal with human problems of about 150 people, Dunbar's number, maybe 300, and we find that when we look at Neolithic bands, they don't exceed that number. That's where that number came from. And the empathy, the what Bob and what Little Englander were talking about of this do we feel guilt, or do we feel an obligation to help and to care? And I think, of course, we do. Our brains are wired that if you were in a group of 150 and you saw suffering near you of your band, you would want to help. Our brains are also geared, unfortunately, I mean, with this, our brains are geared that if you saw a threat to your band from another band, your brains are very much geared to defend and have a battle and a war and win that war, if possible, with that other band to control resources. And we've been on this track. If it is a transhumanist track, we can call it that. We've been on this and improving our abilities, improving our artifice to the stage where we are now, where we are able to control, as you say, 85% or 90% of all biomass, or maybe it's 97% of all animal, non-human mammal biomass is animals that we maintain. We've killed the vast proportion of the wild kingdom now. And it may be that when this system crashes, it will likely be when it crashes, that's final. There's no other empire going to sail in and replace us. There's no other human order. But I would just say that to the many lines of discussion we've opened, that we are not geared to feel more than an obligation to help a very small local number of people. And we are presented with images and with narratives and with scientific discoveries and facts about how dire the threat is to the planet and to now our species. And so we can't help but feel guilt or a sense of obligation. But I would counsel, as I think Going South has said and others, is be aware that this is your natural and I think laudable, originally laudable desires to care are now twisted by a scale of population that your brain was never geared to care for or to feel obligated to help, and is physically, in all senses, impossible to influence or help on that scale. So those are just some reflections, if you will, with a Greek chorus playing in the background saying, and yes, we still, with all this artifice, we don't know why we're here. It's a tragedy, as all the great Greek tragedies are. The chorus and the audience know things that the players don't know. And we are the humans. We are our own chorus and our own audience. And only a few of us are even picking that up. The awareness of awareness of awareness. So that's just a meditative response. I don't know what that will spark in your reply.
I'm thinking of the phrase "lost in translation" because it is. I completely agree with the previous threads that yes, it was the alien cortex. As a biologist, to me, it wasn't like a moment or something that happened in civilization. It was an actual mutation. It was the moment, the time when that brain matured enough suddenly to have that processing power, whether you want to call that a mature, alien cortex or whatever you want to call it. It was a biological, coming of age in a way that was transhuman, in that sense that we now were able to form these huge empires, these huge civilizations. Our processing power increased dramatically. And I really like that you mentioned, how we are wired to work in smaller groups, because this is how we got lost in translation. Because obviously we now, I live in a city of 10 million people almost in London that supposedly functions well despite all the crime, and you can argue whether it actually functions or if it doesn't function. But again, going back to capitalism, I mean, this is how we were able to form bigger groups, because capitalism is not only an economic system, capitalism is also a religion. It gives people things to aspire to, things to believe in. And like all religions, it is both good and evil. It unites people under an idea, an abstract idea, and that can transcend a group from 150 people to 150 million people united by religion, or by I don't know, a football team or whatever you want to call it. And this is an argument that was developed by this guy in his book *Sapiens*. That basically, our transhuman moments, Mr. Yuval Noah Harari. Our transhuman moment really was the fact that it wasn't about resources anymore. It was completely abstract. We could talk about ideas, and this would unite people. We could invent abstract notions such as money, and this, which is completely crazy. It's completely abstract. I mean, there's no value to money unless everyone believes in it. So it was a common belief that united everyone, and it can either unite them for a good cause or it can unite them against each other. Entire countries of 180 million Russians against 45 million Ukrainians. So yeah, I completely agree with you that it was a transhuman moment, and that's when it happened.
Yeah, but it's not just I don't think it's just not just an event. It's absolutely right. It's a transhuman moment. That is definitely sure. But I think that, I mean, that is purely theoretical, and I'm not no proof of what I'm saying. But I imagine that in our evolution from the early human from the bonobo to the early human and to Homo sapiens, the appearance of this little part of our cortex on the left side was probably perceived, but did not dominate and was not the master of the people. And as Jason said, small groups, plenty of food, plenty of time, a life that was, I'm not going to picture an ideal time of the hunter-gatherer, but the conditions for the alien cortex to run amok appeared probably gradually, and we had, I'd say, in the past ways of controlling this dangerous, clever, controlling entity that we had in our brain. And I'm certainly sure that there was some shamans or some people who had the ability to make people see this thing. And I mean, in the past, we know well that it has been referred to in India and various other philosophies, even in Zen philosophy. So I think it's the way more that the master, when it became the master, and that is the moment of the mirror. That's the moment where the mirror broke, as Going South said, it brought us bad luck for a long time. And the transhuman peeping suddenly, coming out suddenly, the little transhuman virus was starting to appear. I'm sorry, I'm a bit sick, so I don't know if you follow what I'm saying, because I'm a bit confused. But you got me?
I follow it. I mean, I follow. I think what we're trying to, I guess, maybe determine is whether there was an actual moment. And I think what you're questioning is almost the question behind that is, were we always evil, or did it happen at some point? Um, I'm not sure if I think it's a combination of yes, there was a moment, because it is a biological event, the alien cortex. It was a process in evolution, but also it takes a while for that to get hold of a society, because capitalism and religion and politics basically exploited the alien cortex, and it took a while for those systems uh, to be to develop. But once they did, they basically held us hostage up to today, because they are extremely efficient in controlling us. That's my kind of view on it. Um,
George, did you ever see Hugh's video on Globeki Tepe?
no.
Oh, we should send you that. Okay, so basically in that video, he pretty much lays out what he thinks happened with the alien cortex getting the control. So what they were doing, so Hugh's interpretation of Göbekli Tepe was people, so it's a temple complex, but back then the temple was also basically the government, the treasury, the marketplace, all that stuff combined. So people, it was like a, a big festival, and they were trading there in that settlement. And that trade was denuding the landscape already. They were killing all the animals, and they were using stone, what is it, stone arrowhead heads, or was it stone axe heads as the currency? And so he said when you start trading, they did that for like 1,000 years, and that's boosting the evolution of the alien cortex in the marketplace.
Mm,
Getting the dopamine feed going. So
mm,
I think it's with settlement that this happens, that you can't settle. So when it comes, yeah, because you're getting larger than Dunbar number of people gathered there trading, so it's literally like the modern market square. And I've also read this phenomenon because I was really big in the wolf biology. Occasionally, wolves will form what's called super packs, so 100 to 400 wolves will get together occasionally, and that has the obvious effects of killing lots of prey and causing hunger. But the thing is the wolves, once the hunger starts, they start fighting and they break up back into normal packs and disperse. They don't have the ability to knuckle down and trade and build armies and stuff and farm. So that's what we could have been doing, because in a lot of ways humans are more like wolves than apes, because we run our prey down, we need to eat more meat. And think of like wolves settling down, building armies and farming. Like it's the same thing, really. So they don't have the cognitive ability to lie to each other and to, knuckle down in that settlement and stay there. Yeah. And so I think part of the wisdom is, yeah, we can't be sitting in a place trading and farming. We have to move if the food gets scarce.
yeah, and this is where the alien cortex, or whatever you want to call this, evolutionary miracle or not, that was our brain, allowed us to do. Like I was saying earlier, um, it's a survival skill, and it was selected by evolution. It was selected to enable us to, first and foremost, source food in a more efficient way. And when we were able to, create tools and create industry, in the 18th century, you can see the population in Northern Europe, how it just shot up as products were mass produced in factories. Essentially, this resulted in the mass production of humans. Um, and this is a conversation I had with Lord Hugh when he explained to me his view of how we are being farmed. And he doesn't mean it literally, but how he has these conversations with you, and he tries to make you think that he's being literal because he wants to almost kind of piss you off. I
Yeah.
kind of, and he does piss me off when he does that, but I completely got what he meant. We're not being farmed by a system. uh, we are by some people sitting in a government. It's not a conspiracy. We're being farmed by this capitalist system that is now able to kind of think on its own. It doesn't need any shaman or politician or economist or banker to drive it. Capitalism is unbelievably self-perpetuating because we all depend on profit, on our salaries. It is a plague, and yeah,
Yeah,
it is. We're farmed.
did Hugh ever talk to you about trade itself? So yeah, basically capitalism itself is the algorithm of trade, and trade is a zero-sum game because even the word ratio, it means like a scale. So basically in trade, you're literally just trying to screw your customer pretty much, even from back in the ancient days. Trade, if your life is completely based on trade, it's a zero-sum game. Like every day we go and we have to, buy and sell each other in the marketplace every day for goods and services, and that's all alienation and stuff. So it's like, yeah, and then on the big scale, the algorithm of capitalism itself is that zero-sum game. It's a
Yeah.
digital algorithm of trade.
I call it a death cult.
Yeah,
We call capitalism a death cult because it relies on putting an expiration date on everything. Because the minute
yep.
you do that, then you can sell more and more of this stuff. Because all these puppies, they die very soon. So all products need to die, and all products need to be consumables. So nothing can be eternal. Nothing. So like, we've made Earth a product, and that's why Earth will die during this mass extinction, this collapse, because of capitalism. Capitalism needs Earth to die because if Earth doesn't die, then you can't sell it in the market. It's we've applied to this to everything. With everything that we've taken from Earth, we've put basically price tags on it so that it can be sold. And we didn't realize that in the end we would become products ourselves.
Yeah,
We became products of the same system that we created to steal from each other and to steal from nature.
yeah, and it's like we all know that the best parts of life you can't put a price tag on, but even capitalism's trying to invade in the best parts of life and put a price tag on it. Or even, with the data mining, they're basically like putting price tags on your consciousness too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's why, like, I agree. Have you ever read Freddie Perlman's book called Against History, Against Leviathan? His whole hypothesis in that book is civilization is completely inhuman, and its goal is to annihilate all life on the planet. So yeah, he saw it. He used Zoroastrianism as a metaphor, and so like the force behind civilization is Ahriman, the darkness that's trying to destroy all light, and light is all the wild animals and free humans from civilization.
But
So
I
I thought
agree
that
with
was,
that. I do
yeah.
think that civilization and the systems that support it, the stock market and, our supply chains, money, just is something that sits above humanity and it stops it from becoming self-aware. Um, yes.
Yeah,
I
it's
agree with that.
blinding people. It's like Hugh talked about Ernest Becker a lot, and part of the reason why civilization got started was because of humanity's death anxiety. Where normal shamans were trying to help people get over their death anxiety without, fake stories helping them become self-aware. These fake shamans during Göbekli Tepe, according to Hugh, took over and used death anxiety to sell us stuff.
Now
And
you're
so,
really talking my language because I know that this is a conversation that me and Hugh passionately shared. We were both admirers of people like Sheldon Solomon and Gabor Mate, who talk about anxiety and the fear of death, and how, and I completely agree. And my version, and I don't know if that rhymes with other things, is that it is all because of a fear of death. Our fear of death increases our our anxiety to survive, to hoard things and resources, and the more we try to deal with we try to deal with our fear of death basically by killing everything around us. I know it sounds a bit crazy, but if you really think about it, think about all those, I don't know, newly rich people that buy the cars and the houses and all that. I mean, they are just completely uh, they're
Yeah,
trying to convince themselves that they are immortal. They're trying to defeat death. They think that by owning things they will be that they will live forever. This is
so the funny thing about that is, one of my favorite lines from that Against History book is Freddie Perlman even says that living things die, you know, like oral history can die, but death itself never dies, and that's what civilization is. That's the psychic realm of it. Becoming death and destroying everything gives you this fantasy that you'll never die.
brilliant. Yeah. I've written a couple of essays on that exactly. Um, it is the death cult that is actually helping us push the thought of death away. It is very it's very ironic, isn't it? And of course, the more you feel that you are overpowering nature, the more that you feel invincible, that you have no predators, the more you feel like you've defeated death itself. Um, it's I think it's a side effect of, and this is something that I think is worth spending a couple of minutes on, because we talked about the alien cortex, we talked about, our, supercomputer intelligence, but as you know, the people who have been the most intelligent are also people who have had tremendous mental disease. And as a biologist, I can understand that, because the minute you build a supercomputer, you increase the risk of viruses emerging and of little problems emerging with that supercomputer. And this is where, humans have all these psychoses. It's because they've got this big brain, and this big brain is able to create its own reality. It's able to fool itself. I think self deception is maybe probably one of our worst traits. The fact that we can, deny climate change. It, you know, with this massive brain, you would think people would wake up.
Well,
But it's exactly because they have this massive brain that they are able to delude themselves. And this is where, whether you want to call it alien cortex or, our intelligence, or it's
Well,
becoming.
I'm not even sure if that's the case. I think it's just that one part of the brain got complete control over everything, and that is our problem. I think the opposite, that we're not using all the elements of our psyche in balance. Because if we were, we'd be thinking about shit like, oh, we should probably not be overpopulating the planet, taking the big picture view. But most people are taking the small picture view because we're indoctrinated to emphasize the abstract parts of our brain. And so, yeah, it's
Hmm.
out of balance. Like, I posted like a week ago, an artist called William Blake. He wrote poetry about these things called the four Zoas, and how basically he interpreted the Christian myth as, Yahweh, um, Yahweh as reason. So when reason comes to take ascendancy, that's like the demiurge creating this shitty universe that is civilization. So yeah.
but the shitty thing called civilization is the child of the alien cortex. It's the meta alien cortex. It's the Moloch. It's the beast.
Yeah,
Well, it is that basically we are that part, our little part of that brain has created this huge monster.
yeah,
And
it's
yeah,
trapped in duality. It wants to create a world where there's eternal life with no death, light with no darkness, joy without pain, happiness without suffering. It wants one side, and so it's trying to use one side to destroy the other, and when you do that, you annihilate everything. It's it's doing the pure negation. It's death itself.
Negation of balance. The negation of balance. Yeah.
I completely agree with that. It's perfectly worded, and it sounds so abstract, but once you think about it, it's not.
George, I don't know if the group wants to go on a slightly new tack, but I'll just propose sort of one or two things. You have been public with your views and have been interviewed, I don't know how many hundreds of times, by various different groups. Let's put them in buckets. I think you've had some interviews with mainstream media outlets. You've had some great conversations and interviews with, if you will, fellow pundits and thinkers in the broad sort of camp of abrupt climate change, people who are willing to have these discussions. So that would be Lord Hugh and many others. Sam Mitchell. I don't know if you've had chats with people like Paul Beckwith or with others, but probably a long list that I've not watched every one of your interviews. So those are two buckets: mainstream media, and then fellow pundits, and then I guess everyone else. And I wonder if you have any reflections on your journey and your experience of being interviewed on these topics by so many people. And what has been your, if you will, your ethnographic or anthropological reflections on this experience of yours? Would love to hear that.
Is that directed at me?
Yes, George. You're the one who's been interviewed by all these people. I'm wondering what you think.
I haven't been interviewed by Paul Beckwith. I really admire him, very much so. He's my super geek. Sam Mitchell is amazing. I watch his videos all the time. I'm really addicted to the Collapse Chronicles. So your question is, what has my experience been with being? It's actually exhilarating every time I get on these calls, because I feel like I'm kicking my alien cortex. It's almost kind of becoming alive.
What have you noticed? I'm not asking for specific names, but for example, the mainstream media, have you done any interviews with mainstream media entities, and how have those gone, and what have you noticed in the aftermath of those?
I actually haven't done anything with mainstream media. I'm still pretty much in the kind of doomosphere of things. I haven't had anything with a news network or something that a medium that kind of reaches a sort of mainstream general public audience. All the channels that have interviewed me are pretty much, like Environmental Coffee House, BlackBerry News. It's always been within the kind of hardcore, let's say, climate awareness society. So far, at least, unless I'm forgetting something. Yeah, but I mean, it would be really interesting, because I would feel nervous about having a conversation with the mainstream media. I would probably be asked questions like, "Why are you an eco-fascist?" Or why? It's like silly stuff like that, or right. What is the alien cortex a cult?
Of course.
What is that? Are you guys from Earth? What do you want from us? So yeah.
What's your thoughts on Extinction Rebellion and what happened there? I mean, I've kind of been out of the loop on a lot of stuff which is kind of weird because we were in the loop for a long time. The others in the group might know more, but I just wonder what your take is on all of that, and also, I mean, now that we are literally staring down the barrel of a gun or a brick wall with this economic collapse, with calamity, which is coming very fast. Do you think that the powers that be, I mean, the climate agenda is kind of, I feel like with the latest Davos and the WEF, the World Economic Forum, it's still there. They've got designs on how they wish to run our lives into this absolute dystopian vision. I don't want to be too black-pilled, but I have grave misgivings on the power that they gained during the pandemic and how that plays out in terms of them controlling our lives in the future with respect to resources and this kind of managed extinction nightmare that Hugh often talked about. But yeah, anyway, sorry, just maybe the Extinction Rebellion, and then what your thoughts are.
Extinction Rebellion came at a time where the environmental movement had been corporatized and greenwashed for decades. So they played a pivotal role in galvanizing people who had completely lost hope, who were in the environmental movement for a while. And I think the way that they did that is by being completely telling it like it is. And I mean, their three demands, which of course will never be met, are quite uncompromising, which is something that I admire. So,
do you think where the movement went with Roger Hallam kind of splitting off and trying to do that Burning Pink thing in London? I mean, we tried to have some interaction with him, and unfortunately, Hugh kind of gave up, and then Hugh died, and unfortunately, it then turned out that Roger was willing to sort of work with him, which was rather a shame. But yeah, I just wonder. I mean, do you think it was? I kind of feel like there was controlled opposition there, and as soon as they started trying to like appease government, it just seemed like it was just completely all a joke, really, at that point. It's not radical, but
obviously they got hold of quite a bit of funding at some point. I know initially they were kind of squatting out of the building out in, I don't know, Shoreditch or whatever, and then they like all organizations, they need to still run on capitalism, on money. So, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I credit them, like I said, for bringing a new awareness, for telling it like it is. I admire Roger Hallam for his uncompromising position. I don't think, flying drones in Heathrow was the smartest thing to do. It's kind of like a bit, are you just going to make people angry? But they did manage to get the UK Parliament to declare climate change, climate crisis, an emergency. I mean, who has ever achieved anything like that? Which is, I mean, again, it's only on paper, but they actually, the level of the shift of what they talked about, the Overton window that they wanted to shift, they shifted that for a while. And then what happened was what always happens in human history, which is once you shift the Overton window, what happens is that the larger window changes. And now you need to shift it more because people have normalized Extinction Rebellion, whether as they're the crazy guys around the block. So it's not a shocker anymore. And then on top of that, you had the people that were now looking at them as terrorists. So, and they are aware of that, and they have been always thinking of, what is the next day? What is what is our next action? How is our next action going to be able to achieve things? And I mean, I've watched a lot of Roger's videos in terms of his sociological theory about what brings about a revolution, which is what he studied in King's College. And the guy has, has a strong view and a plan on what changes. And his theory was that 2% population becoming aware is enough to start a French Revolution. No, so he really genuinely tried to what I liked about Extinction Rebellion was the way that they framed the urgency. They were actually the first environmental movement to come out and say, we're not going to tell you we're saving the planet. We're here to tell you we're fucked.
Yeah, I agree completely. Yeah, that argument in the early stages was very powerful. I think that's what got so many young people. And I think in the early stages, I was very close to to joining, to quitting my job and really joining all that. But I very quickly realised that I just felt like some of the arguments were rather naive, just because of the way they were appealing to government. And now I feel as though they've really gone and shot. I mean, the idea of protesting and getting lots of people to protest, I think Hugh came to that realization that rapidly it was just trying to tip this balance and get large numbers of people out to do what government is never going to work. I don't think that was the right strategy in the end. I think in the early stages it maybe had merit to raise awareness, but now what's happened is they've brought in this crime policing bill, and basically you're going to get arrested if you try and protest at anything. So we've lost more freedoms than ever through the pandemic, and then now you're not going to be able to. I mean, those kind of laws. I don't know what the latest is on it, but it looks. I mean, it's just really draconian. It's kind of backfired in that way. So. Yeah, I don't know, maybe they'll be able to look into organisations much more easily now. I mean, if you're a real cynic or a black pill, you'd say, well, come on, there was bad actors in there all along. It's like what always happens with these, I mean, it happened with the Black Panthers, didn't it, in the 60s, Turned out most of them were all, they were all feds, weren't they, a load of them.
This is where I feel guilty sometimes, because you look at the Black Panthers and you look at what's her name, Angela Davis, is it, who is now basically considered the most, one of the heroes of American history. She was a Black Panther and she was completely uncompromising, went to prison and made a statement, and I don't know if she was even on death row at the time, but I mean, it's you have to, and this is what I guess I admire in Roger, the fact that he fights for things, but it's not for everyone, and it wasn't for me. And at the time, for example, I was like you. I went to a couple of the protests, and I protested with them. I still have the stamp of the Extinction Rebellion on a couple of my T-shirts, and I felt that something was not clicking at certain times. I did sense sometimes a bit of hopium, and now, as you say, I wouldn't say they're colluding with the government by any stretch of the imagination, but like you say, the arguments, I guess, of trying to win the system by being the system maybe is not. It is actually contradicts slightly how they started, because they started kind of almost from a very kind of extreme end of, like, I'm just going to tell it like it is, which this is what grabbed my attention. I couldn't believe it was happening. I was just completely over-enthused in the first days of Extinction Rebellion. I'm like, could this actually take off? Because they're telling people that we're fucked, and the parliament is listening to them. I guess we live in the UK, which is the most, after the US, the most corporatized and predated upon by marketing society. And Extinction Rebellion may have been diluted by process and PR, and it's sad, but you know, I still want to believe in them because there isn't really that much else out there. So I can't say bad things about them. I just can't, especially for Roger and Gail. I have I have a lot of admiration for them. Um, they gave up things that I couldn't give up at the time. For example, I wasn't a British citizen yet, so I was afraid to go out to protests, and I put my name on the list for for jail support. You know what they have? They have people standing by that can go
Yeah, yeah.
give
That's
people.
very noble of you. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I will be honest. I didn't actually go to any, but I did go to the initial meetings because they had these groups of people that went all around the country, you know, to local town halls and gave meetings, and I was seriously considering, and it was an exciting time. You're right. But yeah, I think the problem. I feel with protest, I went to the Iraq war protests in the UK back in 2001 or whenever it was, or 2002. And that was the biggest protest ever in UK history. And it made no difference. The UK government, they went to war. So the idea that the people en masse, I'm deeply black-pilled on that. That the idea that the people can ever be some mass revolution, I just don't buy it.
Well, I mean, this
Unfortunately.
is why I'm here, because I don't believe that we'll be able to wake up enough unless suddenly tomorrow the electricity just went off.
No,
All over the world.
yeah,
And
I
people
think the only thing that could help is
their
to collapse
neighbor.
the system, you know, like
Yeah.
lone wolves or people that can take radical action. And I mean, I support all the government's actions that they've done. I'll just say that now. I'm not advocating for any kind of terrorist actions, but in history, that's proven that you need maybe like a small cohort of elites that can overthrow a rebellion, to overthrow the powers that be, if you want to maybe have some kind of action to
I think
crush the system. But at the moment, the leaders are so bad, I think they're actually going to crash the system on their own without anyone needing to do anything. So that's
Yeah.
kind of good.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny enough because I remember Hugh wanting the Extinction Rebellion to be more extreme and to advocate more strongly a type of kind of dead strike, which they eventually kind of semi-supported it. They tried.
Yes, that was a really good idea.
And Hugh was like really for that. But it's funny. Now it's happening. The economic system is collapsing, so it's happening by itself.
Yeah, that strike, I got happy about that too, because in a way that would be good, because it gets it'll be hardship, of course, like the Great Depression, but it would get the market out of your way, the cage of the market away from you, and then human beings can start to create something from the ground up. So theoretically that is.
Yeah, redefining wealth and degrowth and all of that, which requires.
But there was also the issue of non-violence that was very much in the debate between Hugh and Extinction Rebellion, because I mean he didn't subscribe to this kind of credo of Gandhi and this type of attitude, because he was saying that nothing ever happens in humanity for liberation and freedom without violence. I mean, I'm not an advocate of violence by any means, but we have to be realistic. And he thought that not that non-violence was a strategy of capitalism, really, to control these movements, and that the violence of the system is so strong that it's nearly not seen, and what we call non, so that was at the center also of his critique, this non-violent thing, which is we're not talking about killing people. We're talking about this kind of, we will not do damage. We will not, that was from the start, that was wrong. I agree with that. I agree.
I think the other thing to remember is as well, we're just the little UK, and I think really what Hugh was advocating was to Roger was that ultimately you need to get America and China on board, and they are just such behemoths. If the UK just suddenly all stopped, emitting fossil fuels, and everyone just, I don't know, just stopped doing everything and disconnected itself from the economic system, which is never going to happen, it wouldn't make any difference, because you need China and America on board to just completely stop burning coal and making things, and doing this whole crazy project. So his idea was like, and that was why he was a bit frustrated in the end. He was just like, well, Roger, you need to go to America. You need to go underground. You need to go online and and wake people up there. Which I definitely, he had such good insight, and I think that's very true to say.
I just wanted to say that we're coming to the 2 hour. Well, it would soon be the 2 hours mark, so there will be another interval where I'll have to record again. Do you want to wrap up? Because George, you might have some things to do. We're completely easy, but
I'm easy as well. I've paid my dues to the capitalist system today. I've worked enough, and this is kind of my way of getting back. But it depends on how other people feel.
I have one question on that, George. You, if I'm correct, you have kept a job because, and you can speak to the reasons, but others have referred to, the concept of once you come to this realization, these forms of awareness, many people think, where they start to think, well, the obvious thing I should do is quit everything, quit my day job, quit everything, and make a radical change. And many have gone off in that direction. As you've encountered, again, you've been interviewed, you say, mainly by other people in the sort of collapse arena, and you've probably had conversations with many individuals who relatives, friends. How do you handle the discussion around what to do on a very individual basis when people come into this awareness, and in your own case, what discussions did you have to have with yourself to navigate what you do on a daily basis?
Discussions with myself or with other people close to me?
Either, whichever is worthier of comment.
So it's interesting. Actually, my family has been surprisingly collapse aware. I never thought it would happen. So maybe it was because they were exposed to some of my writing, but there are, believe it or not, other people in our extended family who are also either scientists or come from other areas of knowledge that have kind of come to my rescue and kind of sort of supported my kind of alerted conversations when I did dare to say to things, in passing, when you're in a kitchen and you say, God knows how long for we're going to still have orange juice. So those conversations have gone surprisingly well with my family, but I think that I'm just lucky. I've been able to have conversations with my sister, for example, about antinatalism and my views. At some point, I had a fight with her husband, but then he came around as well. I mean, it's just such. It's kind of, if you really want a good fight, that's the best topic, because the arguments for and against are just completely fascinating. How it's all about how you look at it. If you look at it from a human-centered perspective, then yes, I do have the right to have children. It is a human right. So, yeah, it's a lonely path to be aware for all of us who are in this group, but there are more than 8 people out there who are at different stages of aware of our climate predicament, our overshoot predicament. And the way that I personally deal with the, I guess, the contrast between my doomer life and my normal person out there in society and in the workplace self is, I have no other choice but to live this dual life. I work to pay my rent, knowing that I am supporting some company out there who knows what sort of supply chain they are in and what traceability of their supply chain, where it ends up in some sweatshop in Africa. But this is our whole system. The entire system is like that. There's very little kind of ethical pockets within this economy, because everything is monetized, even things like healthcare, which is the area where I work. I work in healthcare, but I work often with these.
Recording is on.
We just need to be realistic, and I think it's a very personal conversation. Those people who decide to, live off the grid and take that decision, I admire them. There's of course the people who live off the grid who thought that they were doing good, but by buying 3 acres of land and then raising it to the ground and doing other things, they're not really they're increasing their emissions. So there's that argument as well. There's no answer, I think.
Well, my view on the job and paying rent thing is it's not a choice. Like in the U.S., the laws are punitive. If you're homeless, they chuck you in jail. So, there's no choice. So what you have to do is navigate that shitty zero-sum game as best as you can to try and make your life better. Like the only choice we have is to refuse to obey orders. But if you do that individually, they come after you. The only way it's good is if you do it collectively. And that's the thing, like, who is going to get together? How is enough people going to get together and say, no, we're not obeying our orders, we're going to sit here in our chains? Like, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. So that's the fear part. They get you individually, but collectively you can theoretically bring the system down. So yeah, I don't view the participating in the economy as optional. Like it's forced. It's slavery still. Yeah.
This is why I mean the system is going to come down by itself. It's not going to be a human hand that brings it down, but eventually, it will. This economic collapse that we're about to go through. Obviously, things will become quite expensive very soon. So people are gonna, already in the UK, I hear reports of people not driving to their jobs because it's cheaper to stay at home than to have to drive to work because petrol is expensive.
That's a really, really mad thing. I like it. Like, there's people in the care industry who can't drive to their care work. That's how, like, that's the level of degeneration in this society. It's really crazy.
It's things that we take for granted that are just suddenly not going to be there. We're going to see supermarket shortages and just there's nothing that we're going to be able to do because it's all a supply chain that needs to be planned 6 months ahead. When you go out and buy pasta, that pasta is made on wheat that was grown 2 years ago probably. It's all until it filters. When it filters through the system, it's going to be impossible to fix it. Just like when that big container ship was stuck in the Red Sea.
I have a follow-up right on that, which is, does anyone, George and anyone on the call, find it astonishing? Maybe I'm wrong, that each day we're bombarded now with, the high cost of diesel, the high cost of gasoline and fuel and oil. But unlike in the 70s when this happened and there was a crisis with inflation and stagflation, it seems to me that it is not resulting in any significant increase in the push for renewables, electric, solar, electric cars, solar, getting off of fossil fuels. Indeed, in this country, in the U.S., we have the president is bombarded each day and is bombarding himself with, how do I get more oil? How do I get more fuel products and lower the price of gas? And I find it that there's an interesting silence, and it should be. The situation we're facing now should spark, I don't even hear it from Extinction Rebellion, even more of a discourse of, let's get off of these fossil fuels faster. Let's have a plan. Does anyone else detect this as a weird gap, given our situation?
Surely everybody knows that's not going to do anything. There's been so many explanations of how the windmills are not going to replace any of our energy requirements, and I don't know, don't we all feel that we don't really want any of that anyway, even if they could? But I don't think the leaders are interested. The leaders want everything to collapse as well. Or I don't know, actually. Maybe they're all stupid, or maybe there's a mixture. But either the psychopaths in charge want everything to go down the toilet as quickly as possible. Maybe they're gambling that they'll be able to get ahead that way, or they're probably also a large contingent in denial as much as everybody. Actually, I don't know what I think.
Well,
I have a bit of, if you allow me, I have a bit of a more simple explanation. I think we're just less aware now than in the 70s. It goes back to what I was saying, that things are getting worse and worse and worse every year. The more social media we use, the more fake news there is out there, the more we fall asleep in this system, the less we're able to wake up, even with the big thunders coming through. In the 70s, it was right after the whole population was taking LSD. People were having an existential awakening. That was a different time. I think so. I think it might be a generational thing. People are just now saturated all day on their phone, on their, LCD screen, LED screen, whatever it's called. That really damages us. It mutes us. So that's my personal explanation. I'm not as much a conspiracy theorist that there is a government entity there that wants things to collapse, or that there is this supercomputer that is deleting all the news stories about, this means that we need more renewables. I don't think that it's being engineered. I think it's simpler than that. It's just that we just don't care. We're too busy on our phones. The seven.
Yeah, it's much more nuanced. I mean, to get back to that question that Jason put about what, the disconnect of why aren't they driving, I think there is that. I sense that. I talk to people at my work and they're like, oh, that's why I'm going to get a heat pump and I've got an electric car and da da da. But fundamentally, the reason why the elites or the people they're not telling us the dirty secret, the fraud that everyone knows, which is that oil is the economy. Oil, the energy, the natural fossil fuels is the basis of all of civilization. That is the dirty truth. It produces almost everything we rely on. I mean,
Yeah,
so
there's a huge lobby. Absolutely, the fossil fuel lobby is absolutely huge, and there are bots probably that just work on pushing that agenda.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
that is
they're
conspiracy, isn't it? I mean, or that is there are. I'm sure there are elements within whatever group of people have power to do stuff that are conscious of the predicament of the world, and for whatever reasons have decided not to attempt to do anything about it. But there's probably contingents of people who are ignorant of the state of the world as well in positions of power.
I think ignorance and also addiction to hopium, because most of the times that I have, dared to have conversations outside of my inner circle, the most frequent reaction I get is, "Why are you so pessimistic? Why can't you say something positive?" It's really.
Oh, that's very familiar. Why aren't you more positive? So when you say these negative,
do you want the truth?
You're causing those negative things to happen with your negative attitude.
Yes.
Oh,
this is exactly what Roger Hallam said in one of his probably his most mainstream interview when he was invited, I think, on Hard Talk, and he replied to the question from the journalist, what would you tell the patients? Wouldn't you tell them that they have cancer? Would you lie to them?
Yeah, and would you not tell your hopium people that to make your renewables you need fossil fuels?
But they want to be lied to. They are actually asking you to lie to them. They're begging
Yeah.
you to lie to them. This is like the response. It's like,
yeah, it's I feel like the renewable fantasy, it's all death denial, right? So we see that the fossil fuels are going to cause us to go extinct and kill the planet. Oh, we're going to do renewables, and then boom, gives you a dopamine hit to alleviate death anxiety. You get these renewable cult leaders popping up, and then you get guys like Elon Musk who sells the "we're going to go to Mars" fantasy. It's like, it's a fantasy. It's literally what they're doing in Göbekli Tepe. We're not going to die. We're going to go to heaven. It's like, there's no fucking way you can colonize Mars. That planet has a dead core, and if one grain of that toxic sand gets in your habitat, you're all dead. If you can even build a habitat, which I don't think you can.
the amount of greenwashing that is taking place is absolutely astounding, and I think this is why people are not reacting. Is exactly what you said. I went shopping last weekend for the first time in like 3 years because I needed some shorts from, I'm not going to mention the store, but all the labels on the clothes are like, this is a natural fiber, this is 30% recycled, this one is fair trade. They've gone absolutely mad on their labeling, and you see that on every product now almost. It's like they're trying to stop the people from panicking. They're trying to give this false perception that, go buy the car.
Sustainability, that's the word, that's the buzzword, isn't it? Sustainability, everything is sustainable.
Development, which is an oxymoron.
Also, remember what the alien cortex does: label, listing, inversion, substitution.
Absolutely. And George, did you ever come across the recent book by Derek Jensen called Bright Green Lies?
It's been on my list. I haven't read it.
It's a heavy book. It's got a lot of references, a lot of technical and scientific references and a lot of statistics, but it's a really, really good book.
There's another book which is by the co-producer of the movie by Michael Moore. I forget his name. He's got a book on that as well, with lots of technical kind of explanations and the real carbon footprint of things. The real carbon footprint of of an electric car battery. I'm a big fan of Planet of the Apes, by the way. Planet of the Humans. Sorry.
Well,
it's the same anyway.
it is, yeah, because humans are apes, so it's literally.
Yeah, Moore did a good job. There was actually also a movie made on the book Bright Green Lies by a nice. I tried to find the link and send it to you, George, if you like, because it's a good little movie too. We've actually had the honor of having Derek and Lear, Keith and Eric McBay several times on our and Max Wilbert too on our group and interviewed them because they have updated us on an awful lot of things that they're doing at the moment and their position on so many things. They're fascinating people. The people from Deep Green Resistance. They're really at the core, really true and sound people. They are really they have, as they say, they have switched their allegiance from the system to nature. And that's where the allegiance is for them, and there's no compromise.
Yeah, I'm not very familiar with Deep Green Resistance. I've heard of them. I need to get more information on them. Yeah.
I'll send you a link also to one of the interviews with Derek, and you'll be able to see a little bit where they are, because he was interviewed at an early stage by Hugh about 2-3 years ago, and then we always stayed in touch on various subjects, on farming, on especially renewables and stuff like that. So yeah, they're good people.
Oh, Sophie, can you send George the Globeki Tepe video from Hugh's video series? Because I think
I will.
Yeah, it explains so much. I think he nailed it. Like, I agree with that interpretation, like, completely.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that was probably one of his best pieces to camera that he did, and it's quite eye-opening. He talks a lot about that book as well, Against the Grain. Have you read that? That's a really good book about the early
James C. Scott.
Yeah, James C. Scott. Yeah, there was a lot of references and parallels between the Göbekli Tepe thesis and that the early man, early civilization. Yeah.
James C. Scott is an anthropologist from Yale who has written and lived extensively in communities that are mostly in Southeast Asia, and he's based his work on the importance of grain in the implementation of civilization and tax and trade, and compared it to the previous use of roots and perennials in the culture of these people. And when the control started, it started through cereals and rice. And he based his observation on a population in Southeast Asia who completely removed themselves from that, went to live up in the hills, and as a very anarchic type of living. And it's extremely interesting because James C. Scott is an anarchist, and like we all are mostly in this group, I think. So we have this vision on the state, and he has written extensively about the role of the state in our predicament, and nations and authority. So
yeah, he turned that idea upside down, didn't he? That farming came first, and then that led to more free time for culture and religion and then the city to develop. And he said, no, the city actually came first. And this was what Göbekli Tepe proved as well, that it was a bit like a sort of big festival, a big party. Everyone just got together in this place. And then the farming developed in that place to support all of the people that had gathered there who were participating in a marketplace. So this linear idea of the farming, the earliest farming communities is bunkum according to him. It's much more nuanced and complex. It didn't develop like that. More often than not, it was like people were nomads and they were is it early agrarians where they were moving around to find resources, but there was also these hot spots, a bit like Göbekli Tepe, where they started having an obsession with flint making, of flint knapping. It was an inflation. That was a form of money. So yeah, interesting. Yeah.
Well, George, you're going to have some things to watch.
Yes, I look forward to it.
Yeah. No, but there's some very interesting things that we have been exploring, and it's wonderful to be able to share it with people who will appreciate it and who might, get some enrichment out of it. But definitely, James C. Scott is a very interesting man. He actually doesn't really blame farming as farming itself. It's the type of things you were farming and the way you were farming and the fencing and he makes a big difference between the little backyard garden where some semi-nomadic people or mountain people who would go up and down the valleys depending on the weather would grow their own thing from their own seeds, from the people who started to develop gardens for trade and surpluses, and the type of vegetables and the type of plants that they were growing. So it's much more nuanced. It's not so simple. Oh, farming is all bad now. It's not exactly like that.
It's really modern agriculture which damages the soil. It damages the ecosystem by reducing it to just one single species for acres and acres. And it doesn't have to be that way. You can grow things by enriching the soil. You can grow things by allowing, beneficial insects and animals and pests to actually coexist within that system. I mean, this is where we came from. It's intensive agriculture is the fastest way to collapse because we're already collapsing, causing the soils to collapse, and we're reaching the point where on one hand there's not enough fertilizer that we can pump into the soil to shape it up for the next season. Pretty soon we're gonna have supply issues with creating that fertilizer, which is created in big industrial plants. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Yeah, I mean the early jungle, the indigenous people who live in the jungle. I mean, they were like farmers, like Sophie says. Yeah, they had different patches in the jungle, didn't they? Where they were living in a kind of a symbiosis, weren't they, with the with the jungle, and not, it was sort of a rotation. There was a
Then again,
relationship there, wasn't there, with their natural world.
Then again, it's easier to have that. To use the dirty word, sustainable way of agriculture when you have 10, 20, 100 mouths to feed. Now that we have billions of people, the only way that we can feed them, even if we stop eating meat, is again continuing to pump tons of chemicals into the soil every year. I mean, God knows what's going to happen if we have more wars and more chemical plants are destroyed, and there's no fertilizer. If there's no fertilizer, it's not going to be good for agriculture. The yields are going to fall even more, and then of course you're going to have the heat wave on top of it. this multiple breadbasket failure is becoming more and more a possibility. But
That's linked to urbanization. You see, all this, what we're talking about there for the last few minutes, this development of intensive agriculture and everything is totally linked to urbanization. There's from the moment civilizations started to build big cities, they needed to produce an enormous amount of food that could be transported and taxed to big centers. So we're in the conundrum again of this construct of our crazy brain to just aggregate people in monstrous urban hells, which only generates mental health problems, pollution, and what we've been talking about all along. So we're back to the cities, to where the big at the center of, and our population now on Earth is, I can't remember, somebody might know the percentage of people now in urbanized is absolutely crazy. I compared to when I was a child, it is in my lifetime. It's unbelievable.
and also within a few meters of the sea level.
Yes, Sophie, that point, that reminds me, yeah, in that Against the Grain book, it goes right back as well, because early on, it was a raw deal. Like when we went from being nomads and hunter-gatherers, as soon as we began to live in close proximity to each other and to animals around the hearth, we were getting diseases. You get vermin, you get weevils, all sorts of problems and disease. But the only reason, he said in that book, I believe, wasn't it, that we continued it, was because it meant that the women, you managed to get more, you managed to have more children that would survive. A lot of them would die, but you still managed to be able to support more than one child at a time. Whereas when you were a nomad or hunter-gatherer, the woman could realistically, you could only support one child at a time. So again, it kind of almost goes to that root cause of this. It meant you had labor, you had free labor, which sounds awful, but that is the truth. It meant that you could stay in one spot and you had extra people to help you develop. I believe that was part of his thesis, wasn't it? Is that right?
Another thing that Hugh said about the settlement too and trade, because trade, it's a predictable mode of events, right? That keeps going like clockwork. So that's where you start getting Chronos in, and then when you start doing agriculture in a settlement, that's Chronos too. So it's working like a clockwork mechanism, and when you have that kind of predictability, that's when you get the psychopaths with their armies coming in saying, "We'll protect you. You pay us tax. Give us half your grain." And so then that's when you get your government, and they're basically mafia. Yeah. Yeah, so that's the thing about wanting to migrate and not stay in place and follow the herds like, other predators, is because it doesn't create the situation where it's working like clockwork. And so that's where the freedom is taking on that risk. Because if you do things clockwork, the alien cortex will spring up and be like, there's trade, there's growing crops, we're going to manage this, and I'm going to tax, and then we're going to build armies, and then you denude the landscape. It's like, oh shit, well, we're not going to migrate, but what we're going to do is we're going to go to the next tribe, conquer them, and then farm their land too, and farm their labor. And so that whole clockwork mechanism of living, that Chronos, trade, agriculture, creates this whole mechanized system. Like even Lewis Mumford wrote about that it turns man into a machine, turns them into mechanical fighting units.
And the more the population increases, the more we become dependent on large scale agriculture and large yields from crops. So very, very early on, we became dependent on these economic systems. It just it's if you think about it, it would never have happened any other way. We became hooked from the moment when we had to rely on the mass production of large quantities of food and the transportation and creating things like flour, which is, I mean, flour, and think about flour, it's crazy, but it was probably created because it has a longer shelf life than the actual grain. And it's one of the worst things that, I love bread, and every time I have bread, I just think about, gosh, we've gone through this whole process and to create this white powder, which doesn't even look like food, but it's the basis of our carbohydrate civilization.
Yeah, it's like I kind of think of it like this. You ever hear that saying, when like someone fucks up and they're like, it seemed like a good idea at the time. Yeah. And then Hugh liked to quote Shakespeare. He said that basically what the alien cortex does is won us with honest trifles to betray us in deepest consequence. So it looked like a good idea at the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but the problem is not in the flower itself. I think it's about the intermediaries, all the people that come between you and the flower. You see, when there was a time when you used to grow a bit of wheat and bring it to the mill who was up on the hill, and the miller would bring you back your bag of flour for the winter,
Mm.
and making your bread. You needed a donkey or something to carry the bags, and you needed the miller, and that was it. And you were usually cutting your wheat. And the big difference is now that you have completely lost track of how many people and how many machines and how many processes and transport are between you and what you have on your plate. And that is the biggest problem. The
Yeah.
amount of intermediaries that you cannot
That's
have
the
direct
mafia.
contact with what you eat.
Yeah. I remember when my mother used to tell me how when she was little they would use flour from the mill, and they would make this pasta in the house, and they would hang it from the ceiling to dry, also so that the cats can't reach it. And once it was all dry, they would collect it, and that would be their kind of winter supply of pasta that they would put in soups and things. And I mean, it was handmade. Just the fact that we've lost that connection of where things come from, to me, is the most scary thing. The fact that we don't understand where we've come from. we've we've lost the plot in that way, and this is why I lose complete hope sometimes, because I feel like, we were saying very early on in this conversation, that the only hope is if some collapse results in us having to suddenly rely on our own devices and rely on whatever is left of nature, and maybe suddenly we do realize that actually this is not just what we need, it's what makes us feel alive and connected. But I feel like I'm a minority in that sense. As an INFJ, I need nature in my life. I need actual hours of nature in my life to be able to function. And I feel like not many other people are like that. Some people draw energy from being in an urban environment.
I don't know. I mean, I think that's why so many people are just ill, and why our society's degenerated so much. And I mean, all the problems you see around us now, I mean, it's just absolutely staggering that, even since 2016, just everything is just going to shit. If you just forget about all of the issues we've just been talking about and you look at society as a whole, I kind of feel like actually the reason why it's going to shit is because everybody's in these urbanized environments and in this completely just the culture is degenerate. Everything is degenerating. It's just, I mean, yeah, I mean, don't get me started on some of that. I could just, there's just so many things that are wrong. They just seem like we need to go back to that traditional thing. That's probably why, like you say, I mean, we know it, and I think more people do know it. I think in the pandemic, a lot of people realize, oh, actually, it's quite nice being outdoors and doing outdoor things, you know, because they couldn't do anything else. You know, they got bored pretty quickly of sat at home on Netflix or having too many drinks, you know, and takeaways. And maybe, yeah, maybe when it comes, more people will be more adaptable than we're sat here being backpilled, saying, oh, you know, you lose hope. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm too optimistic, but anyway, I mean, I think that's probably the reason why people in the cities are, you know,
I,
uh,
I, think, I think you're right.
stressed and overworked, and you know.
I think you're right, Tom. But I mean, I'm a hypersensitive person, and from a very young age, I was like, George, I needed to be outside, and and nature and calm, and not too many people. But for life is such that you go to university and you have to be in an urban environment, and I never had such horrible years in my life when I had to be in Paris studying for years, and I couldn't put it together. I didn't understand because I was conditioned to believe that that was, you know, the center of culture, the place of knowledge, the stuff, and I eventually went back in my early 30s to nature completely. I left all that urban thing because I knew I was going to lose my wits. But a lot of people, I think, are not just hypersensitive people, but even most people are like this, to less, maybe it's all a question of degrees anyway. You know, there's not somebody who's sensitive and not it's just degree. But I don't think anybody is meant to live in an overstimulating, noisy, dirty, dangerous place like a city where you are overwhelmed by the number of people. As you said earlier, with the Dunbar number, we are not equipped to deal with all these people. We are not. We get overwhelmed. Our brain and our defense systems get totally on alert all the time. So we're in constant neo post-traumatic stress disorder, really. And this is at the core of all what we're seeing with distraction, alcohol, drugs, etc. It's just, you know, we're just using coping mechanisms to put up with a situation we should have never been in the first place.
Yeah,
Amen,
and
sister.
yeah, and in remembering like where we come from, Hugh I mentioned a couple times the moon landing and how all the normies celebrate, oh, we're so great for our technology, and he's like, no, the greatest moment of that is looking back to Earth and that picture of Earth we took. And I thought about that for a while, and I could see it's like, you know, the Earth is the human parts of our brain, and in a lot of esoteric mythology, the moon is a metaphor for mind and thought. So looking back at Earth and seeing all the other brain layers and the ancestors that we all come from, because we all are related on this planet, all animals are our cousins and our brothers. Looking back on Earth and seeing the rest of the psyche and all of the animal ancestors that we came from, I thought about that and I'm like, wow, I can totally see what he meant by that, and that's what we're missing. We're not looking inward and seeing where we came from. We're animals. Our bodies are flesh and blood. The animals are our ancestors. Like even Native Americans talked about like trees being like the grandparents as the oldest and wisest beings on Earth. So it's like that's where the wisdom is. That's where we come from.
Yeah, I call that the internet, the not the internet, the earth net of things, um, which is I guess it's it's not a real thing, but in a way it is. Is that it's the concept that everything's connected, and it doesn't matter if you are more intelligent than the tree. You both have are biological entities that are intertwined and connected, and there's a connection that you cannot avoid, even if you try to create civilizations that shield you or isolate you from the rest of the ecosystem. You will always be part of it, and you will always be related to all the other beings on the planet. I mean, we all came from from one single celled organism. I mean, sometimes we forget that. We all came from this one bug. Everything, the trees, everything. It all is an evolutionary tree that started with one cell. And here we are, turning on each other, and this story that we are today, fighting for over resources.
I like all these different names, like the Earth. Did you call it the Earth made of things, or the Earth? I remember that you used that in
Yeah,
your
it's
book, and
in my poetry as well. This some people don't get me. They think that I'm actually saying that Earth is sentient. I don't really. I'm not actually literally saying that, but I do think that the processes of the Earth, whether it is the ocean currents or the uh, atmospheric rivers or other shifts in Earth, are actual processes of the planet that collect intelligence, and we are almost being surveilled on a constant basis by these systems of the planet. The planet is constantly reevaluating its position using these natural processes to balance itself. So we are providing negative stimuli for a few hundred years now, or thousands of years if you want to extend it, that the system, the EarthNet of Things, has picked up, and it has picked it up so intelligently that it has been able to even pinpoint the one species out of the 8 million species that is responsible to it. I do believe that the pandemic was the most ingenious demonstration of the planet being able to actually narrow down the issues of the planet down to one species and create a virus. And if you think about it in scientific terms, actually it makes sense, because the more the population of a species increases, the more targets there are out there. So, of course, the more targets there are out there, the more the likelihood is that that's where the virus will appear. So, again, I'm kind of purposely trying to, maybe I'm using Lord Hughes' methodology of trying to piss people off to make a point, but I do think that this planet has an intelligence, and that the physical laws that govern this planet and every planet and the solar system eventually balance processes out. How that will happen, it could be a million ways. It could be a virus. It could be the blue ocean event. It could be something positive. Who knows? Maybe the planet will heal itself. We don't know. But it holds all the keys in the end, and we are just one piece in this machine, rather than what drives the machine, which is what we think we are.
Well, I think there is collective intelligence in the biosphere, because I think on the macro scale, ecosystems themselves function like large bodies, because our bodies themselves are ecosystems, right? And then you go all the way down to microbiology, and it's all functioning at that same level. And then you get civilization coming in, it's building squares everywhere. You don't see any body do that. So yeah, so it's kind of it's the machine. Yeah, there's no like perfectly built market squares going on in bodies and ecosystems.
I think this is what the movie Avatar tried to demonstrate.
Oh, I love that movie.
Yeah, it's this Earth net of things that all the species are actually connected, and if one dies, then all the other ones die. It was just very well connected, I think, demonstrated in that movie.
Yeah, I read about that movie after I saw it, and apparently like a lot of people cried because they wanted to live in the world of that movie. Which I can't blame them. I did too.
This was why Lovelock got in a lot of trouble, wasn't it, when he came up with his Gaia hypothesis, because that was fundamentally almost going against rational science, physics, and chemistry, because I think it was a friend actually in a pub that he was friends with, not far from where I'm from, funnily enough. He lived over the other valley before I grew up there, but he was looking for a name for that theory of a self-regulating system. The Earth is a self-regulating system, and when it gets when it gets perturbed, it wants to go to a new state, which is what is happening, isn't it? We're moving into a new Earth state, into a hothouse Earth possibly, and on the way there will be many crazy things that will happen. I mean, the last thing I saw was, I think it was Beckwith actually was talking about the overturning Arctic circulation. So we could end up, back in a kind of mini ice age for a period. But along the way, it's going to be quite a wild ride, I think, to get to that new hothouse Earth or that new state. But it was a kind of, I think the scientific community really didn't like that, because it was almost tapping into a spiritual idea of the Earth system, wasn't it? It's like, how can you ascribe, you're almost saying that the microbes and all the rocks and all of the things that make up the biosphere and the cryosphere and everything is in somehow intelligent, and it's like, no,
this
it's
is
a
exactly
self-regulating system.
the button that I love to push, because I didn't know that Paul Beckwith was on my club, because there's very few scientists who dare to actually think of of Earth as a sentient, quote unquote being, as a concept of it. It is, as you say, a self-regulating system, and that self-regulation is a type of intelligence. And again, if you look at intelligence from a human-centered point of view, then you only see human intelligence. But if you see intelligence from a different point of view of, what is the level of awareness and consciousness of a being, of where it is, you could say that almost every other mammal is more intelligent than humans, because it is not as asleep as humans. It is living its life connected to its surroundings, and very often it doesn't even have to think of what it's going to do next. It has this like sixth sense that I feel that the humans have lost, because we've been disconnected from the earthnet of things.
This is so true. This was exactly what Hugh talked about so much. He talked about that our idea of intelligence, how many things can you remember and how many nerdy things can you rack off like an encyclopedia, is where we're going wrong, because we don't understand other forms of intelligence, lower, or just more ancient forms of being or intelligence. We just think it's about doing some math problem or some rational bollocks, to do with our world that we live in all the time, the rational scientific world. But there's other forms of maybe slightly more spiritual and down to earth.
And this is how we try to test intelligence, and this is what really drives me up the wall. The way scientists try to detect intelligence in other species. So they have, like monkeys pushing buttons to get treats, or octopuses trying to get out of traps, and they think that that's intelligence. Intelligence is a lot more complex.
Yeah, what they're doing with that is they're basically selecting for what they think intelligence is. That's what they're doing with the it's completely self-referential narcissism.
Yeah.
They're basically trying to look for another alien cortex. And it's like, no, these animals are smart in their own ways, okay? They have their own they have their own culture, their own way of seeing the world. And here you're just trying to look for a reflection of your alien cortex in them, and that is fucked up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and with machines, with some of the scientists getting pissed off about the idea of Earth being a living thing, that's more of the alien cortex. Like William Blake, I put a link down there. It's short. Basically, he called the alien cortex Urizen, and what Urizen wants is to make everything into a predictable machine, because machines aren't alive; they're predictable and they operate like clockwork. Because
Mm.
that uncertainty that life provides, starts that death anxiety. And in William Blake's view of like the alien cortex, it's adolescent. It's an adolescent teenager that doesn't want to die, and so it wants to control everything.
I think you've just connected the last 2 hours of conversation almost, the alien cortex with the fear of death. Yeah, it's come full circle. Yeah, this is it.
Yeah, it's like the alien cortex isn't getting the message. Earth's not a machine. We don't want to be a fucking machine. So go away.
Yeah, but to do that, we need to face the alien cortex, and that we're going to another realm of conversation there, where we have often touched again with you and between ourselves, and it opens onto meditation really, and it opens into contemplating this connection we have with everything, and also this. Trying to hijack and no, trying to bypass this alien cortex through various methods of exercise and meditation, but it's the path that the ancients used to talk about enlightenment and awakening and everything. So we're going into another realm there. But
One of the interviews I've done actually is with Dean Walker, who's I think based in California, and he's a psychology professional. He does healing work specifically, I think, for people with who are collapse aware. So I've had some really really interesting conversations with him, and one of the steps is to first try and disconnect from all the information addictions that we have, that you've been talking about, Sophie, living in cities and being busy and stressed and constantly occupied. I mean, if you just take some practical steps there, you might be able to look at to actually look back into yourself and see the alien cortex. I don't know if I've evaded my alien cortex, but there was a point where I feel I reached a level, and I think it happened maybe during the pandemic, because so many things were removed from my life that I was able to see more clearly. When life becomes simple, you suddenly feel like the clouds have cleared. So yeah, I'd love to know what kind of meditation you do. I'm not very good at meditation.
Do we still have that serious website introduction? I think near the end of the piece Hugh wrote, he gives a step-by-step instruction on how to do the meditation. We can find it for you and send it to you.
Sure, yeah.
I think it's the video called "You Think You Know Meditation" or something like that. And there's another one where he talks about this a lot in all his videos. But we've had a lot of sessions between ourselves where he has kind of given us. Well, he has done a bit like you talk about Dean Walker. I've heard about this guy. I've listened to him a few times. He's given us some sort of first aid exercises that we can use when we get overwhelmed by all this. And, you know, especially when we go and we approach really hard stuff in meetings between us. Sometimes we need to just let go of all this and kind of reconnect with our body and you know, simple things. So but then he also explained to us a bit the meditation that he learned, because he was at a very young age, he was in a kind of a cult where they kind of taught him how to meditate, and following an Indian method. And yeah, so he was quite knowledgeable on that, and we all have tried a bit. Personally, I'm not the best either, but yeah, it's we go back to this again. You know, it's we can't avoid it. At one stage, we have to go in. We have to go in back home.
Yeah. My view on meditation, maybe it's because I'm a meditation failure. I had the app at some point, and I've read books. I never managed to meditate, and the way that I think about it is that for those of us who can't meditate, um, maybe it's because we already are meditative in many ways. And I think that the meditation is nothing else than being able to switch off parts of your brain for, you know, a few seconds or a few minutes, or, you know, if you were to simplistically think about what meditation is. And I think that our bodies naturally meditate. Like, think about it, when you're going to the doctor and you're waiting at the doctor's office, you know, there's moments where you it's completely empty, and it can be beautiful. But there you are, because there's the magazines. So, you know, you've got Cosmopolitan, which is a really, really great publication, that you've got all these distractions. But you can, like, our bodies naturally, I think, want to fall into a meditative state. That's why I think we meditate when we're walking to the bus stop, when we're waiting at the doctor's office. If we just become aware of those moments, then we can extend them. I haven't found the solution, because my life, I feel like, is still busy. I would love to not live in a city, and to not work 8 hours a day, and to not, you know, have to do other things. So I'm trying more and more to become a minimalist, basically, to just not engage with the system. I haven't called my bank in like 10 years.
That's a good strategy. Yeah, Hugh often talked about trying to do like small meditations in your day-to-day life, so you can just disrupt the normal daily things, like when you come out of the door and you always do the same actions, but instead you do something else to try and disrupt your normal behavior, and just find meditation in everyday things, like when you're doing the washing up, or you try to disrupt the sort of linear flow of your life as well, to sort of make you see things differently, if that makes sense. I'm not really explaining it very well, but we have discussed those
No,
kind
of
of
course,
things.
the key tenet in behavior therapy, to disrupt your patterns. That's behavior. What's it called? CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yes, yeah. I think that rings a bell. Yeah.
I would like to remind you that we're going to come into the 3 hours mark, and that we might want to wrap it up, because it's been such a fantastic meeting, and I think that we need to follow up this by another talk someday. And but I think it's maybe time to say goodbye, and And I will send you a link to this talk, George, so you can keep it too, because we publish it on YouTube and Reddit, but I will send you also the links that we have mentioned, books and other things, if you like. And I really want to thank you so much. This has been a wonderful moment shared together. I'm really grateful that you took all this time to be with us. And I think I'm talking for everyone there, because I see in the comments that everybody is so happy about this meeting.
I think it was a long time coming, and I want to thank you for inviting me. I feel so rich to have met all of you guys virtually. I didn't expect to meet all these people and to have all these views. I'm really touched, and I wish Hugh was here, but he's with us in spirit. So thank you again very much, and I look forward to speaking with you again.
Yeah, thanks very much. That was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Be safe.